Kaima was a very proud girl who lived with her wealthy auntie for years. She believed her auntie's wealth should afford her a life of luxury, with cars, designer clothes, and a monthly allowance capable of matching that of her rich peers around. Her auntie Nneka was a wealthy businesswoman with a stern disposition and a reputation for building wealth. She hated waste, and while she provided for Kaima's education, clothing, and other essentials, her assistance always came with conditions tied to discipline, gratitude, and ambition. Kaima's mother Ngozi was a poor widow who lost her husband shortly after giving birth to her. They struggled to make ends meet and could barely feed or clothe themselves when Nneka took them in and decided to provide for them. She took Kaima as her own daughter, providing all her needs. But despite this, Kaima never appreciated all that her rich auntie did for her. She believed her auntie Nneka was too wicked and stingy, and that she deserved more than she was being given. This she did, not remembering where they were coming from and the times that they had nothing to eat and prayed for someone to come save them. Now, they lived a comfortable lifestyle, but Kaima was still not satisfied. She saw her auntie as a miser who was unnecessarily tight-fisted towards them. Kaima did not hesitate to vent her frustrations to anyone who cared to listen, spinning narratives of her auntie's supposed cruelty and wickedness towards them. To her friends and neighbors, Kaima painted her aunt as a heartless woman, using every unmet desire as proof of her wickedness. Whenever her aunt got her clothes and other necessary items, Kaima would criticize them, saying that her aunt could do better. How can she buy me these cheap clothes when she can afford items of higher quality? Kaima would always say, venting her dissatisfaction to anyone that cared to listen. No wonder she's still single at 50. What man would marry such a wicked old woman? Kaima said repeatedly as she mocked her auntie for being single. One day, Kaima approached her aunt to request for a new phone. Her aunt had bought her a new phone a few months ago, but Kaima wanted the phone that her rich friends were all using. She asked her aunt, who refused to get one for her, saying that nothing was wrong with the one that she was currently using. You should learn how to be contented with what you have, she advised Kaima, who rolled her eyes and angrily walked to her room. To Kaima, her aunt was nothing more than a cold-hearted woman who refused to grant her the luxury she believed she deserved. After all, she has no children. Why is she being so wicked to me? She asked herself as she thought of what to do. One afternoon, as Kaima lounged at home, complaining to her friends about Nneka's stinginess, her mother returned home in tears. Kaima was so worried to see her mother in such a mood. "Mother, what has happened?" she asked, as her mother informed her that her aunt Nneka was dead. "Dead?" Kaima asked shockingly, as tears poured down her eyes. "Her car went off the bridge this afternoon. The police called to inform me that she was dead." Kaima felt a mix of emotions in that moment. A flicker of guilt lingered in her mind as all the insults and slander that she had rained on her aunt began to haunt her quietly. She had spent years maligning her aunt, and now the woman she had blamed for all her misfortunes was gone. Kaima found this hard to believe and wished that she could turn back the hands of time. Days passed, and the family gathered for the reading of Nneka's will. Kaima sat nervously, her hands twisting in her lap, as the lawyer announced that Nneka had left her a substantial portion of her wealth, including her house and a huge bank account. Kaima was so stunned. "She left me all of this?" she whispered as tears pooled in her eyes. "Yes," the lawyer confirmed. "She hoped you would honor her memory and use her wealth wisely." For a brief moment, guilt gnawed at Kaima's heart, but it was quickly replaced by excitement as she imagined the luxurious life that now awaited her. Kaima wasted no time enjoying her newfound fortune. She took control of the mansion, filled her closet with designer shoes and clothes, and became the life of every party in town. Her wealth earned her admiration and attention, and she basked in it, forgetting the sacrifices Nneka had made to ensure her success. But as Kaima indulged in her new lifestyle, she turned a blind eye to those in need in her family. Her cousin Chika, who had been one of Nneka's dependents, approached her one day with a desperate plea. Kaima, please. Chika begged. I have only one semester left, but I can't register for classes because I don't have the money. You know how much education meant to Auntie Nneka. Please help me. This is all I need to graduate. Kaima scoffed, rolling her eyes. Chika, do you think money grows on trees? I have my own expenses to think about. Besides, you should be old enough to sort yourself out by now. Don't expect me to be your savior just because Auntie Nneka isn't here anymore. Chika left in tears, knowing her dreams of finishing school were now slipping through her fingers. Kaima seemed not to care, and Chika wished that Auntie Nneka was still alive. The next morning, Chika arrived the house again to beg. She met her uncle's wife Adaku, who had also come to seek for Kaima's help. Their uncle Eze was terribly ill and his wife Adaku needed some money for his hospital bills. Kaima was hosting a small party in the mansion when they arrived, visibly anxious and embarrassed. Kaima, I wouldn't bother you if it weren't serious, her uncle's wife Adaku explained. Your uncle Eze needs surgery urgently and we've tried everything we can but we are short on funds. Auntie Nneka would never have let this happen. Please Kaima, help us. Kaima sighed dramatically, sipping her glass of champagne. I'm sorry, but I'm not a charity organization. If I start helping everyone who comes knocking, I'll go broke in no time. You people need to stop relying on me. I have my own life to live, she said to her uncle's wife, who knelt down and pleaded with her not to allow her husband to die. Kaima, in that moment, seeing how desperate they both were, made a shocking proposition to them. If you want my help, you would have to earn it. You can't be lazy and poor at the same time. Work for me, she said, and Chika and Adaku stared at her stunned. Work? What kind of work are you talking about? Chika asked timidly, as Kaima smirked and rolled her eyes. As maids, of course. What else are you both good for? You have to clean, cook, and serve me to earn any money from me, she said to them as the both looked at her shocked. Her cousin Chika, without thinking twice, agreed because she was so desperate to pay for her final exams. Her uncle's wife Adaku, swallowing her pride, also agreed to be her maid. She could not let her husband die, even if it meant serving a girl who was young enough to be her own daughter. Kaima clapped her hands mockingly as she smiled. You both start tomorrow and don't be late. I hate tardiness, she said to them as she walked off to meet her friends who were waiting for her. The next morning, Adaku and Chika resumed at the mansion. They mopped and cleaned everywhere, attending to all the needs of Kaima, who lorded over them at every given opportunity. She prohibited everyone from using the washing machine, commanding that every wash must be done by hand. Her cousin Chika washed all of her dirty clothes and panties by hand, but Kaima was still not satisfied as she ordered Chika to rewash the clothes again and again, claiming that they were still smelly and dirty. One evening, Kaima was enjoying her quiet time in the living room when her uncle's wife Adaku approached her to request for some money to offset some of her husband's hospital bills. The hospital had warned that they won't commence treatment on her husband until some money had been paid, and Kaima, on hearing this, looked at her with disgust. Then, you have to do a quick job for me to earn the money, she said as she handed Adaku piles of clothes to iron. Iron all the clothes and make sure that you don't burn any. Adaku nodded desperately as she took the clothes to iron. Hours later, all the clothes were properly ironed, and Adaku presented them to Kaima, who began to inspect the clothes one after the other. A few minutes passed, and Kaima noticed a faint stain on her favorite white dress. Adaku, what have you done to my dress? Do you know how expensive it is? Your whole generation, Even the ones unborn cannot afford this designer piece, and you have the guts to stain it with your filthy hands? Kaima said to her uncle's wife Adako, who began to plead for her forgiveness, promising to wash it off immediately. Kaima, filled with rage, slapped Adako hard across the face and walked off, saying that Adako should not expect any money from her after what she had done. You poor fools will learn the hard way that money is not easy to come by, she said as she walked out angrily. Adako wept bitterly. Her husband's life was on the line, but here she was, doing everything possible to please Kaima, who did not seem to appreciate the seriousness of the issue. She then decided to approach Kaima's mother, who dismissed her, saying that none of it was her concern. Next time, you know not to make such costly mistakes, she said to Adako, who stood there broken and frustrated. Adako then decided to plead with Kaima one last time in front of her rich friends who had just come to visit, and Kaima, with a wicked grin on her face, ordered her to dance for them. If you dance for us, I'll give you the money that you requested, Kaima said to Adako, who had no other option but to dance in front of Kaima's rich friends, who all laughed and made videos of her dancing. They shared the videos on social media, and Adako became a laughing stock online. Chika watched from the end of the hallway as Kaima humiliated her uncle's wife in front of her rich friends. She walked up to them angrily, rebuking Kaima for her unruly behavior. How can you humiliate a woman old enough to be your mother? Have you no conscience? She said to Kaima, who stood up angrily and poured her glass of wine on her face. Look here, you peasant. You have no right to talk to me the way that you did. Go on your knees and apologize, or kiss your final exams goodbye, Kaima said to Chika, who got down on her knees and pleaded for her forgiveness. Chika knew in that moment that she was fighting a lost battle. She had to do everything possible to secure the money for her exams, even if it meant kneeling and asking for forgiveness. Kaima felt on top of the world as she watched her cousin kneel before her. She could remember the days when she admired Chika and wished to be like her, but now, here she was kneeling before her. Word of Kaima's wickedness spread quickly around, and the same admiration she had once enjoyed turned to resentment. People whispered behind her back, calling her ungrateful and heartless. Despite this, Kaima seemed not to care, as she enjoyed her wealth alone with her mother, who cared not to advise her to change, but instead reveled in the luxuries that Kaima's newfound wealth had brought to their lives. Her mother Ngozi buried her conscience under expensive clothes and shoes. She justified Kaima's behavior, telling her that she deserved all these and more. Don't let anyone guilt you into giving out what's yours, she said to Kaima, who grew more wicked and controlling as each day passed. Her entitlement grew unchecked as she began hosting extravagant parties in the grand mansion, flaunting her wealth on social media and ignoring the growing divide between the rest of her family and herself. To Kaima, their disapproval was nothing but jealousy, and she was not willing to pay any attention to her haters. One morning, an old woman approached the grand mansion to beg for food. Kaima was driving out of the mansion when the old woman approached her vehicle. Kaima rolled down her tinted window slightly, her designer sunglasses perching on her nose. The old woman, dressed in tattered clothes and leaning heavily on her walking stick, pleaded, "My daughter, I haven't eaten in 2 days. Please help me with just a little food or money to buy something to eat." Kaima's lips curled into a sneer. "Do I look like a restaurant to you? Go and beg someone else. I'm not responsible for your problems." The old woman's eyes filled with tears as she stared at her. "May God judge you for your lack of kindness," she muttered as Kaima rolled up her window and drove away, leaving the poor woman standing there in the mansion's driveway. "These people think because I'm rich, I owe them something. It's pathetic," she said to herself as she drove off to meet with her rich friends, who she tried so hard to please. Kaima paid ridiculous amounts to ensure that she stayed in their rich circle. One day, in a desperate bid to outshine her rich friends and cement her place in their lives, Kaima decided to throw a lavish party, a party that her friends would never forget. Kaima was not willing to spare any expense. She hired the best event planners in the city to turn Nneka's mansion into a glittering spectacle. The theme was a night of gold, and Kaima spared no detail. By the time night arrived, Kaima had spent nearly half of her inheritance on the event. Her friends arrived in awe, showering her with compliments and pretending to be impressed, though they whispered behind her back about how desperate she sought their validation. At the height of the party, whilst Kaima basked in the attention, one of her friends casually remarked, "Kaima, you're living like a queen. But isn't this house your late aunt's? Isn't it odd that you're celebrating in a place she worked so hard to build?" The comment, though said with a laugh, struck a chord with Kaima. For a brief moment, she felt a twinge of guilt, but she quickly brushed it off, laughing along. "Oh please, my aunt left this house to me. It's mine now, and I can do whatever I like with it." As the night went on, Kaima's extravagance became the talk of the party. Some guests whispered about how she had ignored her struggling family members, whilst others marveled at how far she was willing to go to impress people that didn't care. After the party ended, Kaima sat in the now empty mansion, exhausted but pleased with herself. The mess of the evening was being cleaned by her cousin Chika and her uncle's wife Adako, who continued to work in the mansion as maids. Just as she sat there exhausted, she received a phone call from her lawyer, whose voice sounded so grave. "Miss Kaima, I need to speak with you immediately. It's about your inheritance," he said. Kaima, annoyed by the interruption, replied him that she was too tired, asking if whatever it is can't wait. "I'm afraid it cannot," the lawyer insisted, informing her that there has been an important discovery that she needs to know about. "You must come to the office first thing tomorrow morning," he said to Kaima as he hung up the phone. Kaima reluctantly agreed, not expecting anything significant. The next morning, she arrived at the lawyer's office, confident and dressed in her finest attire. But her confidence wavered as she saw the serious expression on the lawyer's face. "What is this about?" Kaima asked, trying to sound assertive. The lawyer took a deep breath. "Kaima, it seems there was a condition attached to your inheritance that we failed to properly disclose at the reading of the will. Your aunt Nneka, in her wisdom, wanted to ensure her wealth was used responsibly." Kaima frowned. "What are you talking about? The inheritance is mine, isn't it?" The lawyer nodded. "Yes, but only under specific terms. If it's found that you have abused your position, treated others unfairly, or failed to demonstrate compassion, the estate will be revoked and transferred to your cousin Chika." "That's ridiculous. I've done nothing wrong," Kaima said as her heart began to race. The lawyer handed her a tablet where she was seen humiliating Adako in front of her friends. "There are also multiple reports from people who you've turned away in their time of need, including your cousin Chika," the lawyer said as Kaima's face turned pale. She could not believe that her wickedness had finally caught up with her. She pleaded with the lawyer not to take the inheritance from her, but the lawyer informed her that there was nothing that he could do. "Everything you own now belongs to your cousin Chika," he said as Kaima's eyes shone in disbelief. Kaima's world came crashing down. Everything she had worked so hard to flaunt, her lifestyle, her power and her wealth, was slipping right through her fingers. "No, this can't be happening," she muttered, her voice trembling. "You can't take everything from me. It's my inheritance." The lawyer looked at her with sympathy, but remained firm. "Your aunt Nneka made it clear in her will. The wealth she left behind was not to be squandered or used to harm others. You violated her trust, Kaima." Kaima stormed out of the office, tears streaming down her face. She had spent years mocking her aunt, mistreating those around her, and believing herself invisible. Now, the reality of her actions had caught up with her. She arrived home, ready to confront Chika, when a familiar voice called out to her. It was her aunt Nneka, who she believed was dead for all these months. Kaima could not believe her eyes. She stood there frozen as she stared at her auntie, who was now seated in the living room. I thought you were dead, she said, her voice shaking as she pondered on what would become of her now that her auntie was still alive. All the money she had squandered and all the terrible things she had done to her cousin and uncle's wife came back to haunt her in that moment as she stood there like a prisoner about to receive her verdict. The look in Nneka's eyes was so piercing as her disappointment and anger rolled into a silent storm. How could you, Kaima? Did I ever treat you wickedly? She asked Kaima, whose eyes were now filled with tears. All the while, you thought I was dead, not knowing that you buried a lie. I faked my death to see how well you would manage my resources in my absence. I remember you bragging once that if you are the one blessed with my wealth, you would do better than I did and help more people. So I granted your wish and gave you access to a fraction of my wealth to see how well you would handle it. Needless to say that you disappointed me completely. Kaima stood there as she listened to her aunt, who did not seem pleased with her actions. In a bid to defend herself, Kaima accused her aunt of using diabolical means to build her wealth. You think I don't know that you are evil? How on earth would you have a blood sister, but you barely talk to her or relate with her as a sister? You accuse me of being wicked when you are worse yourself. Kaima said to her auntie Nneka, who broke down in tears as she began to speak. You have no right to speak on things that you know nothing about. Your mother took everything from me, but despite it all, I still decided to take you in and care for you too. What had happened was that 20 years ago, Nneka was set to marry a certain young man. They were so in love and their wedding plans were already in motion when Kaima's mother Ngozi came out to reveal that she was pregnant for the same man that wanted to marry her sister Nneka. This caused a lot of confusion as the family began to push for the man to marry Ngozi instead. Nneka was so heartbroken as she watched the man that she loved marry her own sister. The pain cut deeper than a knife to her chest. Kaima was the child that resulted from that betrayal, a child born out of a tangled web of heartbreak and family strife. For years, Nneka carried the pain of losing not only the man that she loved, but also her trust in those closest to her. Yet, despite the wound that Ngozi's actions had inflicted on her, Nneka stepped up to support her. When her husband passed away tragically, Nneka chose duty over bitterness. She became the pillar that held the family together, providing for Kaima's upbringing and education, even when Kaima seemed to spite her and not appreciate anything that she did for her. Nneka had pretended to be dead to test Kaima to know if she had grown into the responsible, compassionate person that Nneka had hoped for her to be. But the test had revealed something far more painful. Kaima was a girl consumed by greed, entitlement, and cruelty. Nneka's voice trembled as she continued. Kaima, I wanted you to be better than your mother's betrayal, better than the pain I endured. I gave you everything I could, hoping that you would rise above bitterness and selfishness. But instead, you became the very thing I feared, a person who values wealth over people. Kaima's mother Ngozi walked into the room in that moment, her face pale as she overheard Nneka's words. Sister, she said softly, as tears streamed down her face, I didn't know you carried this pain for so long. I thought you had forgiven me and moved on. Nneka turned to her sister, her gaze heavy with years of unspoken grief. Ngozi, I forgave you long ago, but forgiveness doesn't erase the damage that had been done. I only wish for Kaima to break the cycle of hurt, but instead, she amplified it. Kaima fell to her knees sobbing. Auntie, I am so sorry. I didn't know. I didn't understand. Please, give me another chance. I'll change. I swear I will. Nneka's face softened slightly, but her resolve remained firm. Kaima, change does not come from words. It comes from actions. For now, you must learn the hard way. The mansion, the accounts, and everything I entrusted to you will be taken away. Kaima cried as she pleaded with her aunt. Please don't take it all. Where will I go? "What will I do?" she asked her aunt, who informed her that she would have to return to her mother's house. "It's time you learn to live simply and earn your way out of poverty. Perhaps humility will teach you what privilege couldn't." Ngozi, Kaima's mother, tried to intercede on her daughter's behalf. "Sister, please, she's still young. Give her another chance," she said as Nneka shook her head, revealing that enabling her further would only destroy her. "She must face the consequences of her actions, just as I face the consequences of yours," Nneka said as she stood her ground. Days passed, and Kaima packed her belongings and left the mansion. She returned to her mother's little house, where she struggled to adapt to a life without luxury. Gone were the designer clothes, the parties, and the admiration she once craved from others. All her rich friends shunned her, and Kaima was left with nothing but her regrets and the realization of how far she had fallen. Stripped of her wealth and status, she had no choice but to face the consequences of her pride and selfishness. That was how Kaima lost out on a lifetime opportunity of luxury due to her pride and was replaced with her cousin Chika, who was not only humble but compassionate. The lesson to be learned from this story is that true wealth lies in gratitude, humility, and the willingness to uplift others. Material possessions and wealth may come and go, but character, integrity, and compassion leave a lasting legacy. Kaima learned that entitlement and selfishness destroy relationships and opportunities, whilst hard work and kindness builds a life of meaning and respect. I hope you enjoyed the story.